its translation into those things, improved health for Canadians, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. And so that's why we call it knowledge translation. So it's the notion of, and so we actually fund research, which hopefully at some point becomes knowledge. And so the notion of synthesis is how do we actually have enough knowledge or research that we know we need to do anything about, right? So I'm being very cautious about studies that present results for the first times. Are they replicated? Have they been replicated? When do we know there's a tipping point that we actually have firm findings that we need to do something about? Dissemination is kind of the traditional thing that most people think of, but we actually move it from diffusion, which would be you're all rational actors, and of course you're going to have a problem, and when you have that problem, you're going to go to the literature to find a solution. You're going to know which literature to look at. You're going to have the skills to actually retrieve it, then critically appraise it, and then because you found all that trouble, you're going to apply it. We of course know that that doesn't work terribly well. Dissemination is just bumping that up a notch and saying, okay, what's the message, who's the audience, how are you going to get it to them? So I still don't have any assurance that the message that I have for you, you are going to process, but I know that you're in this room and I'm here and there is a message. So the medium is the right medium. I know what the message is and I know who the audience is, right? Knowledge exchange is this notion of co-production of knowledge, essentially, and I'll talk about that a little bit more, but the notion of mutual learning. And then ethically sound application of knowledge. And the two pieces of that phrase, so application is essentially code words for using research or knowledge, which could be conceptual knowledge use, so people using it for enlightenment purposes, increasing their knowledge, influencing their attitudes. It could be instrumental knowledge use, actually following recommendations from trials or practice guidelines or things like that. And then the ethically sound piece is really important to the CIHR. So this is where we're going to have a little bit of audience participation. So we only fund ethical research. So if you involve human participants and you get funding from CIHR, it must go through a research ethics board at wherever your institution is. So by definition, unless there's fraud, all CIHR research involving people is ethically sound. So why would we be fussed with making sure the knowledge that has come from ethical research needs to be applied in an ethical fashion? What would make it unethical? So keep in mind, I'm a sociologist. I have considerable training in qualitative methods, and I can sit you out for a very long time before somebody asks. Come on, it's not that frightening.
All that effort would be wasted.
Yeah, really important, right? So we have research, we know something's beneficial, which means that it's not actually being applied. People are being denied it. And that's true all over the world, but especially true in low and middle income countries where resources are that much more limited. So, knowledge translation from my perspective is an ethical obligation, right? If we have research and it needs to be implemented, and if we're not doing it, we've got an ethical problem because people are being denied effective treatments, policy, programs, whatever. Another way?
Doesn't take into account contextual factors.
Right. So, for example, if we were in the US and we're talking to policymakers in the Defense Department, they might think that torture was an acceptable means of bringing about behavior change in prisoners. Of course, in the UK and Canada, we'd say it was never acceptable to do that, right? So the strategies that you use to actually bring about change, depending on the context, may or may not be ethical. And there's another, at least one more way that ethics comes into it. Anyone want to answer this? So we have research, we need to implement it, right? If we think of it from a researcher perspective, I've done my study, it's been funded by NEAR or the MRC or whoever, and we have such low funding rates, it's got to be the best of the best. It's gone off for peer review, so we know that it's now published, and it wouldn't have been published if it wasn't excellent. So as the researcher, I think everybody should be using my findings, right? Okay, now put your hat in, you're the researcher, and you would agree, and you also get tenure and promotion by getting grants and publishing, so not that you have the best interest. Now, change hats. You're now a manager in the NHS. Well, all of you had research that that manager could benefit from. But now as a manager, what resources do you have? You can't implement everyone who's produced research in this room. You're making decisions. So if you implement something, it means you're not implementing something else. There's actually opportunity cost. And we often completely forget about knowledge translation or implementation science, whatever you want to call it. This notion of, yeah, we could implement everything, but we don't have the resources and the time and the effort and the people to be able to do that. So managers are making decisions about what they do implement and what they don't, and those are ethical issues. Another distinction at CIHR. So end of grant and integrated KT. So the end of grant is the notion of, you do your study, you have your findings, you've been funded by a public agency, you need to disseminate those. You need to get them to the appropriate people. And depending on what the research is and the context, you're going to do different things. If you're doing fundamental research, whether it's biomedical or health services or population health research, and you're advancing the science, who would be the audience? Other researchers. And publishing's a reasonable approach to reach them. If, on the other hand, you're doing something that actually has practical implications for managers in the system, publishing them in an academic journal directed at researchers is not going to be a way that they will actually get those findings. So, end of grant. Integrated KT, so this is this notion of how do you engage? And so the theory behind it is the notion of two communities. We've got the research community working, beavering away, Canadian expression, and we have our knowledge users who could be policymakers, they could be managers, they could be clinicians, they could be the public, they could be patients, they could be who would benefit from these findings. And two words, talk different language, different time scale. People making decisions are making the decisions now. They want answers, they want guidance, they want to make the decision now. Less fuss about maybe 95% confidence intervals. Researchers, on the other hand, it's all about rigor. It's all about generalizability. It's all about we need more money to do more research because we want to be really careful with what we're telling you because we're not entirely sure, because maybe we didn't have our 95% confidence interval, or we need to try it with a different sample, right? The knowledge user is saying, I'm making a decision now. Give me whatever you've got because if it's better than 51% chance, I'll probably include that in my decision-making process. I'm not waiting 3 years. So the notion with integrated knowledge translation is, well, and there's one other big distinction. So the researchers, often curiosity-driven, come up with great things and go to the knowledge users and say, I got an answer for you. I'm really excited about it. And the knowledge users say, that's really wonderful. That's not my problem. Could you do research on this? This is really what I need an answer to. And so for the researcher, in that context, I now have to convince you you've got a problem that my solution's going to fix. As opposed to, I start with, what's your problem? How can we work together? And geez, look at this, I have a solution that may actually address your issue. So the integrated knowledge translation is, and part of this goes back to Jonathan Lomas, who is a Canadian and was head of the Canadian Health Services Research Foundation, and was involved in the conceptualization of the Clark's that MERS funded several years ago, and is in Australia now developing partnership centers there, which are kind of Clark-ish, Clark-like. And so it was the notion of how can we actually get researchers and knowledge users working together in a collaborative way so that the research is going to be relevant and timely and address their needs. So thinking about end of grant knowledge translation, so I think we've covered that. What's integrated KT? It's really a different way of doing research. Collaborative, participatory, action-oriented, community-based, co-production of knowledge, UK term to knowledge production, all more or less synonymous of this concept. So engaging knowledge users and in the research process, we use the term knowledge users. We started calling them end users, and people objected to that, saying, well, they weren't necessarily at the end. We still have people who don't like users because of the connotations with drugs and substance use. And then we needed something to distinguish them from researchers, and so that's why we've gone with knowledge users. And so who are they? Well, essentially they're anybody in the health, and well, in society for that matter, it doesn't have to be in the health system. And in some cases they can be communities, community-based research. The knowledge